It's no secret that superhero movies rule the box office year after year. Whether or not you consider them true cinema, there is no denying their impact on the film industry and pop culture in general. But before Iron Man and the rest of the Avengers soared into theaters, there were a string of less successful comic book films in the early 90s. Most were panned by critics and ignored by audiences, but a few of them have managed to gather a cult following in the years since.
I want you to remember something when you get out of jail, pal. The old people around here are my friends.
Pulp comics became popular in the 1920s and remained so through the 50s before many of the superhero comics we know and love today took over. Pulp comics weren't just for superheroes, they covered many popular genres from adventure, mysteries, westerns, horror, and sci-fi. They were characterized by their often dark, violent, and lurid stories. Around this same time, movie serials also became popular. Serials were typically shown in theaters in conjunction with a feature film. They were short and episodic in nature, and were presented one chapter at a time in weekly installments. Their subject matters bore many similarities to pulp comics, and some were even based off popular comics like Zorro. When most movie fans hear the term pulp, Quentin Tarantino's 1994 hit Pulp Fiction is probably what comes to mind. But Tarantino's classic was far from the only film inspired by these pulp comics to come out in the 90s. The early 90s saw movies adapted from actual pulp comics like Dick Tracy, The Shadow, and The Phantom, as well as original films that were created to invoke the style and atmosphere of these comics, like Sam Raimi's Darkman and The Rocketeer. This resurgence is largely due to the success of two films that came out in the 80s. The first was Raiders of the Lost Ark. The Steven Spielberg and George Lucas picture was inspired by the serial films that they grew up on as kids. Raiders was obviously a huge hit and inspired several knockoffs. Every studio wanted to try to recapture the magic of Indiana Jones. The other film responsible for the 90s pulp overload was Tim Burton's Batman in 1989.
I want you to tell all your friends about me.
What are you?
I'm Batman.
Batman was a massive success and leaned heavily on pulp and noir influences through its production design, story, and tone. Studio execs believed this is what set Batman apart from other superhero films that had failed before it, and began working on other films with similar tones and imagery. First released was Warren Beatty's passion project, Dick Tracy, in 1990. The film follows the famous detective through 1938 Chicago as he tries to take down mob boss Big Boy Caprizi. Dick Tracy is a somewhat messy film. Many critics slam the film's emotional center and Beatty's performance as the main character, while praising its stunning visuals. Beatty and his cinematographer were able to translate the visual style of the comics to the screen by using a limited color palette consisting of mainly primary colors. The film also features detailed matte painting backdrops, which gives the film an illustrative feel. They also used prosthetic makeup designs that were taken directly from the comic strips. These aspects help the film look and feel like a living comic.
Hey, when do we kill Dick Tracy?
This look has only ever been achieved since with Sin City and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
I got married, saved the city some more, maybe too much.
In spite of the shortcomings in its story, these visual feats help make Dick Tracy one of the most unique comic book films to ever be made. Jump ahead to 1994, and Hollywood gave us The Shadow, starring Alec Baldwin. The Shadow was created by Walter B. Gibson in the early 30s, and the comics were extremely influential, spawning a popular radio show starring Orson Welles and several movie serials. The character served as an inspiration for Batman, V and V for Vendetta, and even Darkwing Duck. The film takes place in 1930s New York and follows former Tibetan drug kingpin and current billionaire playboy Lamont Cranston as he disguises himself and fights crime as the Shadow.
I dreamed I tore all the skin off my face and was somebody else underneath.
You have problems.
I'm aware of that.
The Shadow film takes a lot of inspiration from Tim Burton's Batman, copying its distorted Art Deco design and noirish atmosphere. The film was praised for its visuals and production design, but not much else. Critics found the film's plot to be silly, and the characters did not enthrall audiences in the same way as the Caped Crusader. After a dismal box office performance, the plans for a franchise were scrapped. Next, Paramount tried their hand at reviving a classic pulp character with The Phantom, starring Aussie actor Billy Zane. The Phantom was created by Lee Falk and originally appeared as a newspaper comic strip before being reprinted in Ace Comics. Eventually, The Ghost That Walks made the jump to the big screen in a Columbia Pictures serial in 1943, before being updated again in 1996 by Paramount. The updated version follows Kit Walker, the 21st descendant, to take up the mantle of the Phantom.
Who was that guy?
Somebody I already killed.
What?
You heard me. I killed him years ago.
Well, guess what? He's back.
The film moves him from his fictional jungle setting in Africa to New York in the 30s. The Phantom tried to replicate the romping adventure of the Indiana Jones franchise, hiring the same writer who penned The Last Crusade. The Phantom is a fun, family-friendly adventure with some well-staged action scenes that play out quite nice, but it was nothing audience hadn't seen before. They had a handsome lead, but they failed to give the Phantom much character.
No one refuses the Phantom.
There's one film, though, that came out during this time period of pulp adaptations that I think holds up a little better than the rest. I'm talking about The Rocketeer. Its origin story, lighthearted and comedic tone, and nostalgic aesthetic feel like they were pulled straight out of Phase 1 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The Rocketeer was released by Disney in June of 1991, based off a comic from Dave Stevens that debuted in 1982 as a homage to the serial films like King of the Rocket Men and Commando Cody. The Rocketeer tells the story of Cliff Secord, a stunt pilot who stumbles upon a hidden rocket-powered jetpack.
Oh my. What do we got here?
Here, take it back.
Well, that's a piece of work, isn't it?
Yeah. What do you suppose it is, a bomb or something?
No, too complex to be a bomb. I wouldn't touch that if I were you.
He decides to use the jetpack as a means to make money and impress his girlfriend Ginny.
How do I look?
Like a hood ornament.
His heroic deeds soon attract the attention of Howard Hughes and the FBI, who are hunting for the missing jetpack, as well as the Nazi operatives that stole it from Howard Hughes.
Put on quite a show. They can't find out who we are, Peavy. Whoever owns this thing is gonna want it back, and I'm just getting the hang of it.
The film stars Billy Campbell as Cliff Secord, who he plays as plucky and confident, with a wide-eyed enthusiasm.
I'm the Rocketeer.
The Rock of who?
Oh, for crying out loud, haven't you read the paper?
Cliff's girlfriend Ginny is portrayed by a young Jennifer Connelly. They are both actors who fit well into the time period, and certainly look the part of a 1930s leading man and starlet.
Now you tell me.
What?
The maiden voyage. How'd she fly?
She flew great. Landing had a few bumps.
Alan Arkin brings a lot of wit to the film with his sidekick mechanic Peavy.
How about it, Dad?
Secord. Oh, yeah, I know him. Short fella. Gimpy leg.
And Timothy Dalton shines as the pompous Errol Flynn type actor Neville Sinclair.
None of them.
He plays the part with a winking charm and seems to relish playing a more sinister character as opposed to James Bond, who he was known for at the time. The Rocketeer was directed by Joe Johnston. At the time, Johnston was relatively new to directing, but over the years, he has become a sort of journeyman director, known for bringing a nostalgic and playful flair to the films he helms. a style that he clearly developed and perfected with The Rocketeer. Johnston began his career working for George Lucas as a concept artist and effects technician on the Star Wars films, and the first two Indiana Jones. He made his directorial debut with Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, an effects-heavy comedy, also from Disney. Johnston was a good fit to direct The Rocketeer, given his design and effects background, two aspects that would be key to pulling off this film successfully, and in fact, they end up being high points of The Rocketeer. The Rocketeer's production and costume designs help bring the classical Hollywood era and style to life, as well as Dave Stevens' original drawings. The design of the Rocketeer himself is an iconic image with his pilot jacket and finned metal helmet. Some of the sets bring to mind those of classical musicals from Vincent Minnelli or Busby Berkeley. There's even a Max Fleischer-inspired propaganda film that plays a small role in the movie. The visual effects in The Rocketeer were done by Industrial Lights and Magic, the same company where Joe Johnston got his start. This was a time when computer-generated effects were just beginning to emerge, and Terminator 2 came in and blew everyone away. But Joe Johnston and ILM decided to use practical effects in place of the burgeoning but crude CGI of the time. The flying scenes were composed using models and stop-motion techniques, which looks surprisingly good. Watching the film today, the practical effects help add to the nostalgic feel and tone. They feel like an homage to the effects in the serial films that inspired it. If early CGI techniques were used, The Rocketeer would just look dated. One of the most effective aspects of The Rocketeer is its soaring score from the late composer James Horner.
Maybe not. Look!
Up on the dome! It's him!
It's the Rocketeer!
Horner says he wrote the score in 2.5 weeks, as Johnston was still editing the film. He created an orchestral theme that is both classically romantic and contains moments of adventure and excitement. This theme anchors the film, as it is woven in and out of the runtime. The music perfectly captures the modest and wholesome ideals associated with the era.
The Rocketeer is a kind of a story that needs a very straight-ahead, traditional, go-get-'em type score. And if I took really many chances in any direction, I'd be doing a disservice to the film.
It's a lesser-known score than some of his later work, but is considered by many to be one of his finest.
It was the closest I'll ever get to heaven, Mr. Hughes. Well, maybe not.
Despite an expensive ad campaign from Disney and generally positive reviews, The Rocketeer failed to take off at the box office, just surpassing its budget of $40 million. The planned sequels were canceled and the toys and merchandise didn't sell, and the film largely faded from memory.
The Rock of who?
If you watch the film today, you find that it not only holds up, but feels like it would fit perfectly into the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
He has got to be kidding.
One reason for this is director Joe Johnston. He would go on to direct one of the most highly regarded Marvel films, Captain America: The First Avenger. In fact, he was hired partially based on his work for The Rocketeer. Kevin Feige told The Hollywood Reporter, "This is a guy who designed the vehicles for Star Wars, who storyboarded the convoy action sequence for Raiders of the Lost Ark. From The Rocketeer to October Sky to The Wolfman, you can look at the pieces of his movies and see how they led to this one." The other reason it feels so familiar is because it basically adheres to the Marvel formula. The Marvel formula is sometimes credited as the reason for Marvel's success. Others critique the formula, point to it as a flaw that leads to a sameness, or a lack of originality in Marvel films. There are several elements that make up the Marvel formula, the biggest being that they follow the mythic story structure described by Joseph Campbell, Christopher Vogler, and so many more. The Rocketeer follows the structure as well, as it sends its reluctant hero on a journey that changes him and the world around him. Cliff is similar to many of the heroes in the Marvel Universe. He is a little arrogant, and his adventure helps put his priorities in line. It makes him realize his love for Jenny. Jenny herself is similar to Peggy Carter or Pepper Potts. She isn't just a damsel in distress. Jenny is given agency by helping in Cliff's battle and uncovering Neville Sinclair's true motives.
I finally played a scene with Neville Sinclair.
And then there's Neville Sinclair, who fits perfectly into the Marvel formula. He embodies two of the major archetypes of mythic storytelling.
Everything about you is a lie.
It wasn't lies, Jenny. It was acting.
He is a shadowy trickster. He is similar to Justin and Hammer from Iron Man 2 or Darren Cross from Ant-Man. Marvel films are also known for their use of MacGuffins, and Cliff's rocket acts as one as well. It's the object everyone is after.
I want that rocket, Eddie. Not next week, not tomorrow, now.
Oftentimes in Marvel films, the MacGuffin is also the source of the hero's power, whether it's Tony Stark or Howard Pym's technology, a super soldier serum, or the Infinity Stones. The other important aspect of Marvel's formula is tone. Marvel has mastered the art of building tension through large battles and tense standoffs, and then releasing that tension with quippy dialogue and jokes.
Child, things are gonna get easier. Ooh, child, things will get brighter.
Their movies are just as much about the relationships between characters as they are about the battles to save the world.
Big man in a suit of armor. Take that off, what are you?
Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist.
The Rocketeer manages to capture the same tone and these relationships. It's a fun and lighthearted film versus the more serious gothic noir tone of Burton's Batman films, The Shadow, or many of the DC films that have been released in the last decade.
All right, Peavy, stand clear. What was that?
For a film that came out 30 years ago, The Rocketeer is surprisingly fresh and relevant. The film's production design still is a marvel to view, and the film's score elevates scenes with its romantic and triumphant melodies. Joe Johnston's direction and choice to use practical effects help reinforce the nostalgic look and feel of the film from beginning to end. This, along with the Rocketeer's similarities to many films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, cause it to stand up better than many of the other pulp and serial-based films that came out in the early 90s. The Rocketeer's reputation has grown steadily over the years. Rumors of a sequel have swirled for years, and it seems it may finally happen at Disney with a Cold War-inspired story. Disney Junior premiered a TV series based on the film. It focuses on the 7-year-old great-granddaughter of Cliff, Kit, who receives the jetpack and becomes the new Rocketeer. If you're interested in revisiting The Rocketeer or checking it out for the first time, it's available on Disney Plus now.
Go get him, kid.